Hi, my name's Michael Casey. I am the chairman of the Advanced AI Society. We're a kind of a little group of nerds, in a way, sitting between this sort of high-profile political and other conversations. But what we're talking about today is something that we think is just fundamentally important to the kinds of conversations that you just heard, right? We're talking about freedom, we're talking about privacy, we're talking about rights. And what this conversation is going to be about is how do we get all of that to work in what we're calling, the agentic age, right? You've all heard about the onset of AI agents, this idea that these billions of these machines are going to be out there representing us, trading on our behalf, making decisions and so forth. Well, we need to be figuring out how that works. How do we actually have what we at the Advanced AI Society call proof of control, right? We need to, not only do we need to have control over those agents as the humans and as the companies that are basically delegating them to go out into the wild on our behalf, but how do we actually also prove that we do? Because we believe this is going to become a compliance issue, a regulatory issue. If you don't know what your agent is doing for you and you can't prove that's the case, there's a whole lot of issues going to come out of this. And so, and by the way, that's the negative side. The positive side in all this is if we do enable these proofs, and there's privacy, and there's transparency and everything else, it's the unlock. It's actually the mechanism by which this big promise of a open, agentic economy unlocks enormous amounts of innovation and potential. So I like to make sure that we're not just sitting here thinking about the risks, we're also talking about the positives. Anyway, we're going to get into that, and this panel is I think, ideal for it. We've got Brett Tejpaul from Coinbase, who heads up the Coinbase institutional group. And Coinbase is very important in this agentic space because they're dealing with how are these agents going to pay each other? What is the financial underpinning of how these agents work? We've got Rodrigo Coelho who's the CEO of Edge and Node, our latest member of the Advanced AI Society, working on technologies that give the humans the ability to actually see and understand what all these agents are doing and ingesting a lot of really complicated data. And we've got Alissa Starzak from Cloudflare, who, you've all heard of Cloudflare, you've probably seen it along the promenade here, and an absolutely integral part of how the internet currently functions. And they're doing some very, very forward-thinking work on how to bring all of that important security into the agentic age. So it's a great panel, and I think hopefully you'll see how it all fits together in the big themes that are being addressed in this important venue. I'm going to go right to the middle of the panel and go to you, Rodrigo, because Edge and Node in some respects, and Ampersand, the technology that you have, your dashboard, in many respects encapsulates what we're talking about here, right? How do I, as a manager of an agent, understand the massive data that's out there? So tell us a bit about how that works and what the actual problem is with these. Yeah. With this complexity you're grappling with.
Yeah, I think just to start, to set the stage, it's all been, the talk has been all about AI agents, and last year at Davos, agents were huge, and what's happened since the last Davos was that there was an emergence of this X402 standard, which is enabling agents to have wallets and actually have funds and be able to transact. That was kind of the big development in the last year. And that's sort of where we came into the picture. Coming from a blockchain data background and seeing the transparency and openness of the transactions, it became very apparent to us that this emergence of agents and them being able to transact, you could think of them sort of as, there's a term out there as proto-digital humans. So they're going out and taking actions, but now they have money, they have access to money. And so you could think of it like a teenager with like an unlimited credit card, right? And so we've got to put guardrails around that. And so where we came in was, okay, very simply, we need to, put spending limits, be able to view what they're doing. A lot of this stuff in the crypto blockchain world is kind of command line. It's very kind of techy. And so to bring like a beautiful visual UI for humans to interact with that, control spending. On the sell side, if you have an agent that's earning money, very easily to get financial reporting. And so in order for enterprises to adopt this technology, those are the kinds of tools you need and infrastructure you need in order to feel confident to adopt this technology.
Yep.
Yeah.
So I think like one of the reasons why this resonates with us is like, the Advanced AI Society is looking at this proof of control stack, right? All these various technologies will allow us to prove and watch the control over these agents, but that it has to sort of roll back into human authority. That at the end of the day, it doesn't matter whether it's me acting as an individual, sending off, my bot to go off and find me a flight that I want to take, or it is, the head of a division within a large corporation. It's still a human at the base, right? So tell us a little bit about how Cloudflare is thinking about that and the technologies you're bringing in, Alissa, to sort of maintain that authority as these agents move along.
Yeah, I think it's actually worth stepping back a second and thinking about what future we want in this world. In the agent side of things, if you can imagine what it's like as a person with agents, it's like having a personal assistant. So imagine now you're trying to plan your child's birthday, and you basically tell an agent to go do it, and it goes and buys balloons and buys a cake and buys a party planner, and it's just done for you. And if you think about that's on the sort of personal side. Now imagine the business side of that. Think about all of the dumb tasks that feel manual that you don't really need to do yourself. And that is the world of agents. It has an incredible amount of potential. I think Michael sort of flagged this in the beginning. But as you start to sort of go backwards into what you need to actually make that future happen, you realize that there's all sorts of infrastructure that's required for trust. And one of those is actually sort of a verification that an agent that's coming is actually not just spoofed from someone else. And so one of the things that we did at Cloudflare was to develop a standard, a protocol, that enables an agent to cryptographically verify itself. And you can link it in all sorts of different things. You can think about it from a protocol standpoint, but it's very sort of interoperable. But it enables you to do that cryptographic check. So it's one of those first pieces that will come into play on that piece. The other thing that we did in collaboration with Coinbase, but with other partners as well, is to really think about what the payment side looks like. So how do you actually, if you send your agent out, how does it communicate that payment is required? How does it have that transaction? Going back and forth, and even thinking about it on a microtransaction level. So if, for example, you want to have access to a particular piece of content that's online, how would you go about doing that? And that's really where X402 came into play. The concept is that you can actually have all sorts of different payment instruments associated with it. It's a very flexible standard. We're really trying to think about how you enable that future.
Great. I'm going to pick up on this idea of this future we want to have and have another shameless plug for what we're doing here, because putting on an event on February 23rd, just ahead of the Linux annual member summit. Cloudflare, I know, will be there, as I think will Coinbase and others. And our event, it's called Human Authorized. And the point that we're trying to raise here and develop is this idea that what we're calling the Summit on Human Agency, that establishes this sort of ground base, this anchor layer of human authority, such that these agents that are obviously given autonomy are nonetheless based in this sort of ongoing, provable authority and relationship. So human authorized, February 23rd. If anybody's interested, do come and speak to me later on, and we'd love to see if you could come and attend. But I want to use that to basically segue to you, Brett, because before I get you talking about X402 and why that's important, when we met yesterday, you gave me this little story about problems that led to the global financial crisis that many in this room would remember, maybe with some PTSD of what was there. And it's interesting, this is about the mortgage origination problem, and it was like humans versus machines, and what was the better way to do that? And I think that some of the dynamic that we're seeing here, there's huge opportunity for agents to solve problems, but we've still got humans involved. Just tell us that little story, if you don't mind.
Yeah, thanks for inviting me. I'm super excited to be here. I contextualize where I sit in the world as the cross-section between new technology and the existing financial system. So I think it's super provocative to say things like agents and teenagers and autonomous activity, and your imagination really begins to run. So leave it to me to spoil the party and bring it back to dollars and cents and numbers. But I think there's a good story here about the adoption of technology and what could go wrong without trust and with some of the controls that my partners are bringing. So I'm old enough to remember going through the global financial crisis within the context of then a big bank. And if I were to describe, as I do to my college-age kids, like what happened, I'd say if I had to, there are lots of things that happened, but one thing that happened in particular was the self-certified mortgage application process. And I'm not going to go too deep in it, but I'll tell you a little bit about what happened. So America in particular was in a stage of huge economic growth. Mortgages, everyone's probably applied for one in your lifetimes. And there was a battle amongst all the banks to actually lend. And so everyone wanted to originate. People wanted to build houses. There was a lot of commerce that was going on. And what happened is, ultimately, the barrier of underwriting got lower and lower and lower and lower. And ultimately, just before the peak of the crisis, if you're an individual, you could go into a mortgage application and you can say who you are, where you worked. You'd put out minimal information, your social security number. It would prompt you to say, well, how much money do you make? What are your assets? What are the value of your assets? Where do they exist? And you'd fill out this whole application. And I remember Mike Cagney from SoFi at the time was launching SoFi, and he said you'd hit a button, and presto, you'd have an answer. It said like you've been approved for a mortgage. And I remember the story he told me. It stuck with me that people didn't believe it when it happened at the time because it was so fast. They had to slow it down, and they put like a little dial, and it made it look like it was thinking. But actually, they slowed it down so that people stopped like refreshing the browser and all this stuff. So presto, you get this loan, and then before you know it, you're like, that was easy. I should buy another house.
Yeah.
And so on it went. And what you had was a degradation of the lending standards. You had a degradation of what the source of truth was. And you had these automated systems that were ingesting all the information and making immediate decisions on credit and then actually committing balance sheets. So does that sound that different from agentic commerce? Not really. Yeah. And so when I think about where we're headed, for my job, I bring institutions into the world of crypto and digital assets. It seems like a huge leap, and it is for many institutions. When I think about the application of agentic commerce now, I find all these analogies to real life that already exist and can be improved. So if I think about that process reimagined, with these tools, with a proper source of truth, you can still have some human involvement if you need to do some interpretation of data. But actually, there's a huge amount, and there's a whole regulatory framework which supports it. So we actually don't need, I think, the same things that we've come to lobby for. We're here in Davos talking about all sorts of regulation. Actually, the financial system globally actually already has a very, very well-articulated series of rules and decisions and inputs and risk evaluation. It has all that stuff. So for me, it's less of a leap of faith than it was to go from financial system into crypto than it is to sort of reimagine a better world where agents can begin to operate autonomously.
Yeah. So I love that you sort of talked about this as part of the trust structure of it, because this is the title of this talk as well. Like, how do we get to the point where we can trust the agents? Agency is the agentic story is not going to emerge unless people can trust it. But trust actually requires friction in a way, right? Like you actually have to introduce these structures and these regulations. And in many respects, like people look at Bitcoin and they think of it, this incredible invention that allowed peer-to-peer spending. But actually, it's the resolution of a decentralized approach to resolve the friction aspect of it. Like, how do we actually prove that we can trust each other? That is the innovation here. This is why there's sort of tension between, like you think about bringing in regulations or bringing in these procedures and protocols and so forth becomes, in some respects, putting a little bit of sand in the wheels. Mm-hmm. But in reality, without that, we're never going to be able to grow the whole thing. So tell me a little bit about how X402 fits within that context, right? Because it's an extension of the smart contract idea, the blockchains that were really built to resolve this trust problem. And then how does it play into this? So
we're going to talk about X402. To keep the definition short, it's an open internet protocol for payments. So that's what it is. And where it leads us is to a rules-based system. So I'm going to tie together two concepts and then ask panelists to jump in. So we've talked a long time about Ethereum and smart money and contracts being able to exist with each other on a blockchain and have an if-then system and interact. All of that, I think, specific to this very initiative, comes together quite nicely. Because you don't need to let your imagination just roam freely. You can give it actually well-articulated, well-designed, rule-based systems that require data and a verification of the data, and then a constant verification and revalidation of risk frameworks. And so X402 is just really making, I think, the old world better. I would come under criticism with my engineers from Coinbase who think the old system needs to be flushed entirely, and we should begin from a blank sheet of paper or a blank sheet of code. I don't think that's the case. Actually, I think we can tie together neatly smart contracts and where we've been headed in crypto and digital for a long period of time. And actually, this can, for me, can actually accelerate super, super quickly because it can leverage the old, make it better, and off we go.
Great.
Yeah.
So XRF2 is one of a number of protocols trying to solve this problem, but it's the same as everything in this space right now. There's like a proliferation, really, of models. You've got, Google has its A2A protocol for agentic coordination, and Anthropic has MCP, and it's just all over the place, right? So what's Edge and Node's approach to this, right? Are you sort of banking on one and betting on X402 as the future? Or how do you build for a world that is still trying to figure out what this structure looks like?
Yeah, we tend to be agnostic. And so I think part of what you're doing with the Advanced AI Society is that we come together, and this is something that happens in the blockchain world, is that in a decentralized manner, we come together as different parties and agree on standards. And so similarly, this is what is emerging, with stakeholders and different enterprises coming together to evolve these standards. And then we want to be agnostic in terms of the dashboard so that you can interface with the different standards and be able to interact with them and view them and control them. So we will see emerging, though, as like anything else, there will be those that take the lead and become, what is most utilized. But what's really important, though, is that the transparency and openness of the blockchain and the visibility is kind of the differentiating factor over the traditional rails. So we're having kind of parallel systems with the Stripes and the Visas of the world. So you'll send a payment through that, and that goes through kind of traditional rails. It goes into their systems. X402 is this open and transparent system that is sort of taking off on its own, and it's into a world of open standards. Like we are talking about 8004, which is a reputation standard. Mm-hmm. There will be others, but there are groups of people coming together to form an agreement on how we're going to manage these trust relationships, how we can sort of emulate what's already existing in the traditional financial rails in this kind of blockchain crypto world.
There's a hard part and an easy part. I'm going to break it down. So the easy part is actually understanding the exam question and what is it I'm trying to do, right? That's the easy part. I think I've explained that well. The hard part is actually doing what my colleagues do here, so which is the evaluation of this. You descend quite quickly into tech speak.
Yeah.
And you have protocols, and you say, how do I evaluate the speed, the efficiency, the security? That's the hard part. And so the picture I want to paint is that it's not a leap to do what we're intending to do. That's the easy part. We can make mortgages, in my example, run better, faster, quicker. The harder part is the evaluation of the technology and the application and the integration of that tech. And so that's why you need the experts here that understand both of those worlds. And then the combination of those two things, if you gain confidence in any firm's ability to evaluate the tech that support it, and you know the problem, you have a match.
I think the thing to add to that is that what you will end up necessarily having is different protocols for different purposes. So they're not all interoperable, and the whole goal is to have ones that are actually fit for purpose for whatever you happen to be doing. So that tech world of what do you have to develop will depend a lot on what you're trying to do. And so you will see different ones, you will see them combined. You will see a world where you have a lot of different standards so that you can actually integrate. The goal is to actually have them interoperable so everybody can use them. That's the long-term goal, I think, for everybody. The question of sort of how it all pans out exactly, we don't know yet, but that's the process that we're in. I think the other thing I would say on that trust model, that agent piece, what we're really talking about is, imagine if you are a small business owner and you're trying to get into the world of agentic commerce. The question is, do you trust the people who are coming in the door one way or another? And so the idea of a trust score is really saying, well, most people have trusted this one. This one is one that is fully regulated. This one fits under certain standards or certifications. And it's an evaluation of basically saying, hey, is this one that you want to trust? Imagine you can put essentially a trust score. Everybody above a 90% trust score, yes, I want to do a transaction with it. And so it enables you to have a agent-to-agent transaction that buys into that long-term trust.
So,
but, yeah. I was just going to say, it's still, but a lot of that is still a work in progress. I think we're still developing those, but the goal is, again, interoperable, something that works for everyone.
So, I mean, I've been covering crypto as a journalist and then sort of being involved in it at MIT. And I've just a long time really looking at blockchain applications and use cases. We're always looking for what the killer use case is. And I'm a little biased, but I do think that AI, and actually specifically agentic AI, is it. And one of the things that you're talking about here, Alissa, about trust scores and reputation, raises this question. And the reason why I think that this is, agentic AI, I feel it cannot function without a distributed, record-keeping function, which is what a blockchain is because you're going to have all of these agents residing in different. You can't trust OpenAI necessarily, or Google, or AWS to be the arbiter of that trust score. Right? We're going to have to develop it across multiple different environments. So, I mean, you guys, if you want to just give me some sense of why is the blockchain important to this kind of thing?
Yeah, a perfect example is, so an agent is sort of out there offering its services, right? And then it performs some service, and whether it does it successfully or not, the agent that paid for that is going to say, yes, that was a successful transaction, but that is open and transparent for everyone to see. And so you can see the entire history of everything that agent has done, and you can make your own determination, or your agent can determine, okay, this agent has successfully completed 100,000 transactions, no failures, I'm good. I completely trust that this is going to complete my task. So the openness, transparency, and observability of the blockchain is, I think, a key element in establishing the trust versus it going into a black box, and then you're having to trust whatever organization is in the middle there that is giving you that score of reputation. And
okay.
So picking up on just the 90%. So I spend my life talking to institutions. Engineers are awesome because they're like, listen, I've solved this problem 90% of the time. That sounds pretty good, right? What do you think the banks say? 10% of the time you're not solving it correctly. We need 100% of the time. And so going back to the work you're doing, so the work you're doing is critical because, again, going back in the crypto journey, you say, well, how do you pick a custodian? Mm-hmm. You need an evaluation framework to do it, and no one better than an independent body to actually help everyone understand the questions and the evaluation of the efficiency of the network. So that's a key point. The second one is we can start with 90%, and whatever that is, I'm going to pick on that number because I need to get to 100%.
Should have gone with 99.
99. So you have to go 100% of the time. The decisions need to fit within the risk parameters. And then you should have a bunch of stuff that almost got done but didn't. And that exists on the periphery for verification. So it's really important to have the industry standard developing, which is the same thing that everyone had to do for the first time in 20 years when they picked new custodians and new brokerages and new everything, right? And then a second lens is again for that hard part, which is how do you hold Rodrigo and everyone accountable for the efficiency of the agentic commerce. And so anyway, I just paint that. I'm like the board guy.
I'm glad you threw in the
but
evaluation
it's important.
bit. Yeah.
It's important.
I actually want to defend my 90% first, or my 90% for a second, because I think what the reality is that not all agentic transactions are going to be payment transactions. And so practically, you may have a lot of reasons. You may want bot traffic, for example, of all kinds. So do you allow it to browse your website? Do you want to actually think about whether it can look at what's on it, and not necessarily for the actual payment transaction? Imagine you run an e-commerce site, but just to look at it so it can give people ideas. So there are a lot of choices to make as if you are somebody who's actually thinking about what agent-to-agent transactions will be. Payment is an incredibly important one, I think, and long-term is something that we absolutely need, but it's not the only one.
So I'm glad you raised, and thank you for the plug about what the society is doing. So this evaluation framework that we're working on, we're calling the Proof of Control Initiative. And one of the important pieces of this is that we want to bring together the industry, and it's not just the engineers in the room, right? Like, because if we're going to come up with an evaluation framework which we can say to the CEO or the chief revenue officer or anybody else in the organization, oh, here's what your agent is doing for you and here's why you can trust it, we're going to have to establish frameworks that are consistently valuable to everybody across the organization. This isn't just something for the engineers to figure out, right? So I'm just wondering, maybe, Brett, as well, from your experience working on Wall Street, right, where you've got to battle these things through, and there's been a lot of financial engineering and new ideas that's been brought to the street. How do you deal with that? How do you herd all the cats and get? And it's not just about the same firms; it's also different people within these organizations to agree on this.
One by one.
One by one.
So,
all right.
so
takes time then.
Honestly, the average lead time from here's a concept, I think you might enjoy meeting your client's demands by doing this new thing, for many institutions is a 2 to 3 year cycle. And it's painful to say it out loud, but it's true. And we go through thousands of questions. I have an 11-person team. The only thing that they do is answer questions in what's called RFPs, request for proposal. But I'm actually super encouraged by it, right? Because on one sense, the boring diligence bit, it keeps people safe. So if I mess up with one large, which we never have, institution, then the whole thing comes down. Your credibility is lost, trust is lost, and nothing ever happens.
Right.
So we've been carefully plotting forward on the institutional side. Now, I do also want to address the 90% as a workable framework, because in the context of really agentic commerce at the personal level, if I'm trying to do the kid's birthday party or my travel or this, and if my assistant could get 90% of my travel right, I'd be amazed. And so there are different thresholds for what's acceptable.
Exactly.
And I think that it's really cool to work at a place that has both sort of a different set of risk thresholds and customer delight on the retail side, and pairing that off on the institutional side. So I often think about the retail and sort of personal things as like the leading edge of the sword. That first informs us, how's it going, where did it fail? And you can have risk thresholds which are small. So if, how many times did my flight get booked to the wrong place? Yeah. And I had to fix it in the airport, like all the time. And so was that a total fail? In her case, yes. But that I'm making fun of like an important point, right, which is people that want to adopt technology can do it often at a quicker pace, and they have higher risk thresholds. And so it's a really good framework for us to actually see things live. Also, if you go to any institution and say, I want to do this new thing, I want you to do this new thing, and it's wildly amazing, and we've never done anything wrong in the history of time, also not credible. So it's important to have an evolving book of work and an evolving framework to evaluate, like where did we mess up, where does it get better, let's this thing make more decision making, and without what we think are the catastrophic outcomes, it's just kind of where my mind goes.
So before I bring in you put on your legal hat here, Alissa, I'm going to frame this a little bit. This 90 versus 10% thing is interesting in the context of AI, because I don't think we've ever been in a situation before where the leaders of the biggest AI companies have said things like, there's a 25% chance that this technology actually might lead to human extinction. So like you're talking about risk tolerance here, and where your threshold is. Well, we're playing around with something that could go 25. We've got a 75% chance that humanity is going to be okay, and a 25% chance that we'll all be gone. So no wonder there is a push for regulation, right? This is something that is inherently people are excited and understandably somewhat worried, right? So is that it? Like we come in and just like is now a chance for regulators to come in and make sure that the move fast and break things doesn't actually break everything?
I actually think Brett's point from before is a very important one. There is a lot of regulation out there already.
Right.
And I think the goal is you need to leave enough room for some experimentation because people will have different risk thresholds. So when we think about it, we kind of look at what's happening in the market just in general. And the goal is to have risk-based frameworks. The idea and many of the things I think we're working on is transparency so that you can actually decide what your level of risk is. So imagine I think on the bot side of the world, if you think about what's happening on the internet today, you were talking about going institution by institution. The reality is that traffic is changing all the time. AI is expanding at incredible rates right now. So right now, global traffic is about 30% bot traffic. We anticipate that it's going to skyrocket with AI agents. And so how do you think about that from a risk framework if you're going institution by institution? It doesn't work. You have to have systems that enable you to progress while still maintaining control on the areas that are most at risk. And then those are things like financial markets. So understand that you will have different risk frameworks for different kinds of activities, and that's important, but a lot of those risk frameworks already exist, and particularly in the most sensitive areas, they're very much financial markets being sort of a key component of it. A lot of these areas are already regulated.
All right, well, that's all we have time for now. I'm going to wrap it up there. Listen, thank you for this tremendous panel. I'm going to make another plug. February 23rd, Napa Valley, Silverado Resort, the Human Authorized Summit on Human Agency. If you're all interested in coming, and please see me, and I'd love for folks to be there and to sort of learn more about this stuff. But a round of applause for Alissa from Cloudflare, for Edge and Node, who sponsored this panel. Thank you so much, Rodrigo, the CEO, and of course, Brett Tejpaul from Coinbase. Thank you.